Russia-Ukraine war. On March 31st, Russia increases pressure as Ukraine struggles to defend multiple fronts. On March 31st, the Russia-Ukraine battlefield continued to see escalating tension as Russian forces ramped up their offensives, pushing Ukrainian troops into difficult defensive positions across multiple fronts. From the Zaporizhia direction in the south to the northern outskirts of Kupiansk, Ukraine was forced to retreat in most areas. According to Military Summary Channel, Ukrainian forces are struggling to prevent a collapse of their front lines, as Russia expands its buffer zones near the border under direct orders from President Vladimir Putin. Footage from the Sumy region shows that Russia has nearly taken full control of the village of Pipka. In southern Donetsk, geolocation confirms Russian presence in Novosinka, Razliv, Bohati, and Przenka. In Toretsk, fierce fighting continues. Russian troops have captured the village of Krasno Pervo and are now isolating Ukrainian forces in Kamenka, threatening the supply route between Veliki Puluk and Kamenka. According to Rybar channel, Russian advance units have reached a key highway connecting Ukrainian bases north of the Oskil River. Losing Krasno significantly weakens Kamenka's defense, possibly forcing Ukrainian forces to abandon the area in favor of holding Kolodin. In the south, Russian troops are approaching the villages of Konasuka and Malia Shapovka, preparing for a broader offensive. In Donetsk, Russian forces claimed control of Razliv, a key defensive position. After 10 days of fighting, about 400 buildings were cleared and 2 Ukrainian companies were reportedly neutralized. Military Chronicle reports that Russian units now control most of Razliv village and have shifted to a new phase of operations, having broken through Ukrainian defenses in western Kurakov. Russia now has 2 major options: launch a direct offensive along Highway H-15 toward Budianovka, or maneuver northward along Route T-0428 to outflank Ukrainian fortifications and strike logistical weak points. Ukrainian reports confirmed 175 clashes occurred on March 31st alone, including 56 around Bakhmut. Russia launched 1 missile, conducted 73 airstrikes, used 118 KAB bombs, deployed 650 suicide drones, and executed nearly 4,000 artillery shellings. Ukraine's General Staff stated they repelled attacks in Kharkiv, Kupiansk, Lyman, Kramatorsk, Toretsk, Bakhmut, Novopavlivka, Zaporizhia, and Donetsk. In the Kursk area, Ukrainian units reportedly repelled 26 Russian assaults. Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky said Ukraine destroyed 408 Russian artillery systems in 1 week thanks to accurate counter-battery fire and effective defense operations. Since the beginning of 2025, Russia has lost a total of 4,005 artillery systems. Syrsky thanked Ukrainian troops for their combat effectiveness and noted that recent modernization of basic military training helped reduce casualties in March compared to previous months.
Russia intensifies integration of occupied Ukrainian territories. As the world closely watches Russia's next move regarding the temporary ceasefire agreement with Ukraine proposed by the United States, questions remain about whether true peace can be achieved between the 2 nations. However, one undeniable fact is that even if the fighting temporarily subsides, the Ukrainian territories under Russian control are gradually being integrated into Moscow's administrative, passport, and education systems. Increased administrative control in occupied Ukrainian territories. According to France 24 on March 13th, Moscow's control over eastern Ukrainian territories has become increasingly systematic. Officials from Helping to Leave, an organization assisting Ukrainian citizens in evacuating occupied areas, reported that Russian checkpoints have become common at city entrances, rural regions, and major roadways. These checkpoints allow Russian forces to regulate access to different areas and scrutinize the identification documents of civilians. For those attempting to leave Russian-occupied territories for Ukrainian-controlled regions, the journey involves first passing through Russia and Belarus before reaching Ukraine's northwestern border. Border inspections at Russian checkpoints can take hours or even days. Russian border guards reportedly pay special attention to young Ukrainian men, most of whom have already been issued Russian passports and risk being conscripted into the Russian military. "We can never guarantee that Russian border guards won't detain them. It's like a lottery," said Sofia, a representative from Helping to Leave. Last week, the Kremlin announced that it had issued 3.5 million Russian passports to Ukrainian citizens in the occupied regions of Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia, 4 territories Moscow declared annexed in September 2022. President Vladimir Putin confirmed that the passportization process in eastern Ukraine is largely complete, solidifying Russia's control over these areas. Forced integration and population resettlement. In occupied Ukrainian territories, those without Russian passports are classified as foreign nationals, stripping them of property ownership rights, pension benefits, and access to health care and social welfare. The Russian government has also been using humanitarian aid as a means to encourage people to accept Russian citizenship. This includes financial assistance for relocation to Russia, subsidies for families with newborns registered as Russian citizens, and other economic incentives. According to researcher Jaroslava Papieri from PB Ham University in the UK, children in Russian-occupied schools are required to follow the Russian education curriculum. The Ukrainian language, literature, and history have been completely replaced with Russian language, Russian literature, and Russian history. Any mention of Ukraine has been removed from textbooks introduced by Moscow, Papieri stated. While some parents continue to educate their children online following Ukraine's national curriculum, such actions must be done discreetly. Anything perceived as support for Ukraine has become dangerous. Even speaking Ukrainian in public could lead to arrest, Sofia warned. Strengthened Russian control and territorial consolidation. The Russian government has announced plans to build 25 new prisons and 6 detention centers in occupied Ukrainian territories by 2026. Additionally, Moscow is pushing forward with a resettlement program to bring Russian citizens into these regions. New legislation permits the confiscation of abandoned properties, while financial aid is provided to Russian citizens seeking to purchase homes in these territories. As of March 2024, at least 1,785 apartments and businesses in Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia have been seized. The tightening of control over all aspects of life in occupied territories indicates that Russia is gradually incorporating these areas into its administrative system. Analyst Papieri commented, "Although President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly stated that Ukraine will never recognize any occupied territory as part of Russia, the longer these regions remain under Russian control, the harder it will be to reclaim them."
Hungary unexpectedly supports extension of sanctions against Russia following U.S. pressure. Recently, Hungary, a country that had previously opposed the European Union's EU extension of sanctions against Russia, has shifted its stance after direct intervention from the United States. According to sources, a phone call between U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó played a crucial role in this decision. During the discussion, Secretary Rubio persuaded his Hungarian counterpart to abandon plans to block the sanctions package, thereby allowing the EU to maintain unity in its pressure campaign against Moscow. Earlier in January, Budapest had threatened to veto the renewal of these restrictive measures, citing Donald Trump's election as U.S. president and the anticipated changes in Washington's foreign policy. The Hungarian government has repeatedly emphasized that sanctions have harmed the country's energy security, particularly given its heavy reliance on Russian supplies. However, after negotiations with Secretary Rubio, Szijjártó agreed to support extending the sanctions for another 6 months, an unexpected shift for a nation that traditionally holds a distinct stance within the EU on Russia-related matters. Hungary's decision paved the way for the EU to formally approve the next phase of its sanctions regime on June 17, 2025. These measures have been in place since 2014 and are regularly updated to respond to Russian actions. Compromise between EU and Hungary achieved after energy supply assurances. According to Bloomberg, the compromise was reached after Budapest received assurances regarding energy supplies, though the specific details of the agreement remain undisclosed. The negotiations with Hungary reflect a broader context of U.S.-European interactions amid shifting strategies in Washington. As reported by Reuters, since President Trump's return to the White House, Washington has actively worked to coordinate its policies with allies. Earlier this month, the U.S. sent a delegation to Brussels to discuss sanctions, emphasizing the need for a unified response against Russia. At the same time, President Trump also announced plans to reassess his approach to the conflict in Ukraine. raising concerns in Europe about the possibility of a softer stance from Washington toward Moscow. Poland wishes the U.S. success in negotiations with Russia. Ukraine sets red lines for peace talks. On March 18th, Polish television channel TVP reported that the country's foreign minister, Radosław Sikorski, wished U.S. President Donald Trump good luck ahead of his phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin regarding the Ukraine issue. Sikorski expressed hope that Trump would succeed in persuading Putin to abandon what he described as unreasonable demands. Speaking at a meeting of European Union (EU) foreign ministers in Brussels on March 17th, Sikorski emphasized, Putin could end this war in 5 minutes simply by withdrawing his troops from Ukraine. He also expressed hope that the U.S. president would demonstrate his negotiation skills, adding, "We will assess the success of Trump's talks based on the quality of the peace agreement achieved." Ukrainian experts doubt U.S.-Russia negotiations will succeed. Contrary to Poland's expectations, some Ukrainian political experts remain skeptical about the effectiveness of Trump and Putin's phone conversation. Volodymyr Senko, director of the Penta Center for Policy Studies, told Polish news agencies that he does not expect much from the discussion. According to Fisenko, Russian President Putin will attempt to convince Trump that Moscow is ready to negotiate, but only under the condition that Ukraine makes concessions. He warned, it will depend on Trump whether he agrees to this, and whether there will be a new wave of pressure on Ukraine to force us into making some concessions to Russia. The expert also stressed that Ukraine will not accept any ultimatum from Russia, particularly concerning territorial concessions or abandoning its NATO membership aspirations. There will be no agreement on Ukraine withdrawing from Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, and no compromise on us abandoning our NATO ambitions, Fisenko asserted. Ukraine sets red lines for peace talks. According to The Independent, UK on March 16th, Ukraine has outlined several red lines as the US pushes for a ceasefire agreement with Russia. These conditions include no further territorial concessions, despite Russia's desire to gain full control over 4 Ukrainian regions, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk, which Moscow has claimed and partially occupied. Return of thousands of Ukrainian children. Kyiv accuses Russia of illegally taking Ukrainian children out of the country and demands their immediate return. Release of unlawfully detained civilians. Ukraine calls on Russia to free civilians it has detained illegally, stating that these individuals are not prisoners of war and should not be included in any prisoner exchange lists. International security guarantees. Ukraine insists on international oversight and guarantees to prevent Russia from violating any future ceasefire agreement. These tough conditions highlight Ukraine's firm stance in negotiations with Russia, while posing a major challenge to U.S. diplomatic efforts to secure a long-term peace settlement for the ongoing conflict.
U.S. continues to send military aid to Ukraine, a just distribution method. Shipments of U.S. military aid to Ukraine are reportedly continuing to arrive in Poland, albeit with some modifications compared to previous deliveries. According to Polish reporters, these shipments are still being transported to Rzeszów-Jasionka Airport, but the subsequent distribution process has changed. Weapons temporarily stored at U.S. military base in Poland. Previously, military equipment and weaponry for Ukraine were immediately transported across the Poland-Ukraine border. However, the new approach involves storing the shipments at a military base near the airport, which is currently used by the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division. For over 3 years, Rzeszów-Jasionka Airport has served as a critical logistics hub for international military aid to Ukraine. Reporters observed the arrival of a Boeing 747 cargo plane operated by National Airlines, a Pentagon contractor, at the airport. Additionally, a convoy of over 20 trucks was seen leaving the airport and heading toward the Ukrainian border. This suggests that, despite temporary storage, Ukraine remains the final destination for these shipments, as the conflict with Russia continues. U.S. alters military aid approach to Ukraine. Experts believe that this new distribution method may reflect adjustments in the U.S. approach to military aid. Since taking office in late January, U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly emphasized the need to reevaluate the volume and method of support for Kyiv. In early March, the Trump administration suspended direct intelligence sharing and halted military aid to Ukraine, raising concerns among Kyiv and its European allies. However, according to local reporters, this does not mean the complete cessation of aid. Instead, Washington is shifting to a more controlled distribution system in which the U.S. military base in Poland plays a key intermediary role. U.S. may resume intelligence sharing with Ukraine soon. On March 9th, speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One, President Trump announced that the U.S. has nearly lifted the freeze on intelligence sharing with Ukraine, but did not provide further details. Trump also expressed optimism about the upcoming negotiations between Washington and Kiev in Saudi Arabia. According to the plan, U.S. and Ukrainian delegations will meet in Jeddah on March 11th to discuss the framework for a potential peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia. Washington aims to use the meeting to assess Ukraine's willingness to make key concessions to Russia in pursuit of a resolution to the conflict. President Zelensky: Ukraine wants to demonstrate good faith in ending the conflict. In an interview with the press on March 12th, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky affirmed that Ukraine wants to demonstrate to U.S. President Donald Trump and European partners that Kyiv is serious about ending the conflict. When asked about the red line, Zelensky emphasized, "As president and as the people of Ukraine, we will not violate our constitution. We will defend our sovereignty and independence while also protecting our people and our territory." He asserted that Ukraine is facing a strong adversary, but will not recognize any territory controlled by Russia. This is the truth, and no one should forget it when I say this. This is the most important red line, he stressed. President Zelensky acknowledged that he does not expect Russia to honor agreements, but emphasized that Ukraine's acceptance of the U.S. proposed 30-day ceasefire is necessary to refute claims that Kyiv does not seek to end the conflict. "I have repeatedly stated that none of us trusts Russia. We have experienced this before, but we do not want to be drawn into the narrative that Ukraine does not want to end the war, a narrative that Russia is spreading worldwide," he said. The Ukrainian leader also underscored the importance of demonstrating a commitment to peace to the U.S. and Western allies. "I'm very serious about ending this war. I want the U.S. president to see that, for the U.S. to see and feel it, and for Europe and all our allies to unite in doing everything necessary to force Russia to end this war. That is why I'm declaring that Ukraine is ready to implement the 30-day ceasefire as proposed by the U.S." Russia announces control over Suza town in Kwak province. On February 12th, Russia's RIA Novosti news agency released drone footage showing Russian soldiers gathering at the central square of Suza town, Kwak province. An officer with the call sign Tima, a battalion commander of Russia's 11th Airborne Brigade, stated that the Russian national flag and the insignia of the participating units had been raised atop the town's administrative building. The Russian Ministry of Defense has not yet provided specific updates on the situation in Suza. However, in a statement on the same day, Russia announced that it had regained control of 5 other residential areas in Kwak province, including Kachalonia, Kaji 1, Kaji 2, VTI, and Mini. Russia's strategy in Suza. Suza is the largest urban area under Ukrainian control in the region and plays a crucial role in Kyiv's strategic logistics. Over the past week, Russian forces have launched multiple offensives against the town to push Ukrainian troops out. On March 11th, General Apti Alaudin, deputy chief of the Russian Army's political directorate, declared that Russia had nearly encircled Suza from all directions and was engaged in combat with Ukrainian forces within the town. Ukraine's response. In August 2023, Ukraine launched a counteroffensive in Kwak, aiming to force Russian troops to withdraw, protect its border province, and halt Russia's advance in the Donbas front. Kyiv also sought to gain leverage in future negotiations. However, the situation did not unfold as expected. After an initial surprise, Russia reinforced its troops, deploying tens of thousands of soldiers to the front while maintaining its momentum in Donbas. On March 10th, Ukrainian Army Commander Oleksandr Syrsky stated that Ukrainian forces in Kwak had successfully repositioned to more favorable defensive positions. He affirmed that Ukraine maintained control over the border situation and faced no risk of encirclement. However, according to Meduza, an independent Latvia-based media outlet covering Russia, Ukrainian units in Kwak province are retreating toward the border. Meanwhile, Forbes magazine reported that a significant portion of Ukrainian forces, including one of its most heavily armed brigades, had withdrawn from Kwak province and relocated to new positions within Ukrainian territory.
Trump increases pressure in Ukraine peace talks, 6 concessions to Moscow. In a push to reach a historic peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, U.S. President Donald Trump has increasingly positioned himself as a key mediator, According to analysts, Trump has granted Russian President Vladimir Putin several bargaining chips in the ongoing negotiations to end the conflict, while simultaneously ramping up pressure on Ukraine. Experts warn that Ukraine, heavily dependent on U.S. and European military aid, could lose its strategic edge if the prolonged war continues for years. Trump's negotiation tactics are further complicating the situation for Kyiv. Recently, U.S. officials have led discussions with representatives from both sides in Saudi Arabia, aiming to reach a broader ceasefire agreement. Here are 6 major concessions Trump is believed to have made to Russia. Multiple calls with Putin. President Trump has openly expressed his desire to improve relations with Russia. Just days after taking office, he held a 90-minute phone call with Putin, effectively ending the U.S. policy of isolating Russia that had been in place for 3 years under President Joe Biden. Negotiations without Ukraine's presence. Senior U.S. and Russian officials met face-to-face in Saudi Arabia in mid-February 2025 to discuss restarting bilateral relations, including reopening embassies and exploring economic cooperation, all without involving Ukraine or its European allies. Public statements on Ukraine surrendering territory. Trump and his national security advisors have stated that Ukraine will need to give up some of the territories currently controlled by Russia, describing it as a reality that must be accepted after 3 years of warfare. Increased pressure on Ukraine. Trump has temporarily halted military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine and publicly questioned Kyiv's seriousness about ending the war. These measures were only reversed after Ukraine agreed to a proposed 30-day ceasefire. Removal of security guarantees and NATO membership for Ukraine. President Trump has rejected the idea of the U.S. offering security guarantees to Ukraine after a peace agreement, and urged Europe to bolster its own defense capabilities. He also demanded that Ukraine abandon its aspirations to join NATO, which he claims is a root cause of the conflict. Ending investigations against Russia. Following a phone call with Putin on March the 18th, the U.S. withdrew from a multinational group investigating Russian leadership's accountability in the Ukraine conflict. Additionally, several U.S. national security agencies ended investigations into Russian cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns. Observers assess Trump's approach as pro-Russian and undermining Ukraine's negotiating position.
Russia strikes Ukrainian mechanized brigade in Sumy province with Iskander-M missiles. On March 18th, the Russian Ministry of Defense released a video from reconnaissance unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, showing the assembly point of Ukraine's 144th Mechanized Brigade in a forested area of Sumy province. According to the UAV footage, the Ukrainian unit had set up tents and parked military vehicles in the forest to avoid detection. However, Russian UAVs identified the target through gaps in the tree canopy. Following the reconnaissance operation, Russian forces launched an Iskander-M tactical ballistic missile strike on the area. The missile detonated at a high altitude to maximize damage, resulting in secondary explosions and large fires. Russian UAVs also tracked a Ukrainian ambulance evacuating casualties after the attack. The Russian Ministry of Defense did not provide specific details regarding Ukrainian losses, but Russian media estimated that the strike resulted in 65 Ukrainian soldiers killed or wounded, as well as the destruction of 2 trucks and 13 light armored vehicles. The Ukrainian military has not yet commented on the incident. Ukraine's 144th Mechanized Brigade was established in February 2023, initially designated as a reserve infantry brigade. The unit was later upgraded to a full infantry brigade before Ukrainian military command decided to transition it into a mechanized brigade. Russia intensifies attacks on Ukrainian logistics bases. In recent months, Russian forces have repeatedly targeted Ukrainian positions in Sumy province, as the region serves as a key staging ground and logistics hub for Ukraine's operations in Kursk province. Beyond Sumy, Ukrainian units in other areas have also been struck by Russian Iskander-M ballistic missiles, a weapon system known for its rapid target engagement and difficulty in interception. One of the most devastating strikes occurred on March 1st, when a Russian Iskander-M missile hit a training ground in Dnipro province, resulting in at least 32 Ukrainian soldiers killed and 153 wounded.